The American presidency is a really unique institution. When you meet people from other countries who talk about their executive leader, it's quite unique, and oftentimes it's confounding to people because it's difficult to understand. The notion of having some powers and then being checked by other institutions like the courts and Congress is something that doesn't really come naturally to lots of other democracies. So the American presidency requires sort of an extra level of study and analysis because it is complicated, and you're not just talking about a presidential system. You're talking about a separated institution or a separated system that has Congress, the courts, and the executive branch. So in that respect, I think it's unique. It has unique powers. It varies tremendously from administration to administration. It varies over time because of technological developments and other types of sociological developments. It's not static. It's it's a dynamic institution that requires, I think, very careful analysis. It does not do well to generalize about the American presidency, but it's worthy of, I think that it's appealing to students for a lot of reasons. It gets the most attention of any of our three branches in American politics. So in that respect, I think that students are sort of naturally interested in the American presidency. At the same time, I always think it's good to caution students that the power of the presidency is not omniscient, that this is an executive that shares powers with other branches of government.
In the most general sense, the American people have an ambivalent attitude about executive power and the American presidency. And that is that they revere presidents who are heroic figures in our past. And they find great value in powerful presidents, particularly at times of great crisis when the nation is confronting a foreign enemy or a domestic problem with the economy. And so there is this embrace of a strong presidency. But at the same time, perhaps our most fundamental governing principle is separation. It's separation of powers is division. And even in these instances where a president is leading us through a moment of great crisis, like Abraham Lincoln in the Civil War, or Franklin Roosevelt in the Depression or World War II, there is anxiety about the exercise of that power. And I'm not talking about the fringe groups that are opposed to Lincoln or opposed to Franklin Roosevelt, but even among the commonplace run of people in Congress and in the press and the courts and the American people, among the political parties, there is a kind of anxiety and ambivalence about the investment of that kind of power in any one individual. And so it's widely understood, although not often expressed, that this is going to be a momentary departure from the constitutional norms of separation, that although it's necessary to deal with the problem that the country faces at the time, that there is still a bit of anxiety about providing that much power in any one individual. And so that ambivalence is real. It's and is rooted in sort of the fundamentals of a political culture which tends to prefer political power separated and dispersed among institutions. This ambivalence is older even than the country itself. There are two terrific pieces of evidence about not just ambivalence, but anxiety about executive power in the earliest periods of American national politics. The first one of those comes with the Articles of Confederation, which is a favorite topic of mine. It's something that almost all of us are exposed to in grade school, and we know a little bit about the Articles as a kind of as a way station, a brief trivial moment on the way to Philadelphia in 1787, where we have the Constitution that we currently revere. And so what we know about it was a sort of failed experiment. From my reading, it's extremely important, though, because it's the first attempt at forming a national government. It's our first choice. And normally, if you ask people what their first choice is, they go to their most fundamental preferences about, what's your first choice of ice cream? Chocolate, I love chocolate. Well, what's the first choice of government? In the United States, as it was formed under the Articles of Confederation, it was a very different kind of government than the government that you find in the Constitution in Philadelphia in 1787.
They called it the Great Experiment at the time that they were creating and figuring out how to run the government. As we know, the Articles of Confederation failed for a variety of reasons. And so they came up with the idea of creating a president so that there would be energy in the executive, but with a tremendous level of checks on the institution because they were so fearful of a monarchical regime. You have to really go back and try to put yourself in the mindset of what it was like to be ruled by a king. And then try to think of yourself, okay, now we're trying to establish a new government where we need order and we need legitimacy, but we don't want to be dominated. We want freedom and liberty. When you talk about the American presidency, what really distinguishes it from any other executive leader in other countries is that they often say that the president wears many hats. In our case, the president is chief executive, responsible for the executive branch, the commander-in-chief. The president is also the head of state, meaning that they are the symbolic leader of the United States. And by having an individual be the leader, or whether it's symbolic or not, it aggrandizes power to the institution of the executive. And so more often than not, you see the Congress and the courts deferring to the president when it comes to war making, foreign policy making. In the case of members of Congress, many of them are from small districts, perhaps rural, throughout the country. And, sadly or not, a lot of American people are much more concerned with their backyard, with their education in their congressional district. When it comes to foreign policy, the citizenry is not very well informed. And so that gives members of Congress a lot of leeway. And so even though they may be of the opposite party of the president, they might be a Democratic when it's a Republican administration, they often defer to the president because they feel that the president has more expertise. The president has the Secretary of State, the president has the Secretary of Defense, he's commander-in-chief of the military, the president has the CIA, the NSA, all of these organizations that are collecting information so that he or she potentially can make the best decision, a decision that's in the best interest of the country.
There are two reasons why it's important to truly understand the presidency, its history, its function, and its future. The first is, by far and away, the President of the United States is the most important policy actor on the world stage and domestically. And his ability to influence the lives of every American is profound. It's more substantial than the Speaker of the House or the Majority Leader of the Senate or the Chief Justice of the United States. He has an effect based on the decisions he makes and in the future she makes on a daily basis to either help or hurt the lives of Americans. And as a result of that, understanding which individuals are running for president, what types of powers they'll wield, what types of policies they're going to propose, what the likelihood of those policy proposals to succeed are, is essential not just to being a good voter, an informed voter, but to understand the deal that you're getting when someone is elected. At the same time, because presidential power is ever expanding, understanding the roots of those powers and the scope of those powers gives voters and all Americans an understanding of what this office means for the system and for them. And as a result of that, it can allow responses to presidential power when it crosses a line. If an American citizen doesn't understand what a president is supposed to do and not supposed to do, they won't be able to identify violations of law and violations of the Constitution. And when that happens, it can very much damage a democracy. So understanding this office is probably more important than understanding any other office in the American system.
I think that the American people like to celebrate the presidency as a place of heroic achievement. And there is, accordingly, an expectation almost that the presidency will be a place of heroic achievement. I mean, if the great success stories of America's political past are embedded in the stories of people like Abraham Lincoln or Franklin Roosevelt, or Republican, and you want to add Ronald Reagan to that list, it guides your expectations. You come to expect that that's what's there. And that does a disservice to the normal run of people who serve as president of the United States, because by and large, those kinds of presidents have served in times when big moments required big presidencies. Most of us have the luxury of not living through big moments. I mean, we've lived through big moments, and they're painful. If you go back to 9/11, for example, it's not an experience people would like to replicate, and yet those seem to be the kinds of experiences that are necessary, by and large, to create the circumstances essential for a presidency to be enormously powerful at the expense of the other branches of government.